So, Mr. Adam Best, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Ben.
This time remotely. So, last time we were recording in the Sydney Salesforce office, actually, and this time you've upped and left us, and you've moved to sunny Queensland. How's that going?
Look, it's going fantastic. I think a lot of people have moved remote and moved in a state. But yeah, Queensland is great. Very lucky to live in Australia. Very lucky to live in sunny Queensland.
Yeah, I'm very jealous. It's freezing cold in Sydney today, and I'm imagining I can't see out your window, but I'm imagining blue skies.
Well, I'm still with you with the trailblazer jumper on there.
That's true. That's true. Well, let's dive into the questions, and some of our listeners will have heard you on the podcast before, but we've got some different
Mhm.
topics to run through today. We're still going to focus around your passion, and I must say, of my years in the Salesforce ecosystem, I'm yet to find anyone as passionate about delivery and DevOps as yourself. So yeah, tell me a little bit about yourself, and before we go into DevOps, how did you end up working in the Salesforce world?
So I started my career in I guess the early 2000s in ASP and PHP and open source and a variety of other technologies, and I found myself venturing into the Salesforce industry through a friend. He tapped me on the back and said, "Hey," tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, come look at Salesforce." And I was very fortunate, and I've been very fortunate to be here ever since. It's definitely a leading vertical of IT, and I think true to the platform, it's more about the change and the speed to market that gives customers the edge.
So your first step into the Salesforce world, you were coming from a development background. So was that as a developer?
Yeah, that's correct. It was initially as a developer, but as I got more into the platform, I realized that the click before code was a guiding principle, and I got more into consulting rather than just the development itself.
So at what point, and I guess so, when did you join the ecosystem?
I think it was around 2008, 2009. So about 12, 13 years ago. Um,
Sure.
and I think Visual Force pages were just introduced. Yeah, so lots of innovation since then from Salesforce and the platform.
So I'll ask you two questions in one, and this
Mm.
one's a big one. So, in terms of DevOps, can you tell us more about what DevOps is? But then also, when did DevOps become a thing in the Salesforce world?
Mm. They're two good questions. Um, so DevOps is an organizational capability. I think people, process, and technology all working well together. So DevOps is important because it provides business the agility and speed to get your change out and to get your change out quicker than your competitors, which is going to obviously give you a competitive advantage. So DevOps makes up a number of, I guess, components: build, test, release, continually improve, and so to get change out quickly. That's why business do focus on DevOps. Now, traditionally, Salesforce has been in a lot of companies, but in a smaller, I guess, capacity. But with Salesforce being the mission critical platform for larger enterprise over the last 7 to 10 years, we have seen an increase in larger scale transformations, which require enterprise scale kind of build, test, and release. And so, therefore, DevOps has been, I guess, a bigger focus because of the large scale transformations of these organizations.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, from my experience, having recruited in the Salesforce world for the last 6 or so years now, it's gradually become more of a talking point, and I'm sure it was happening before I got into this space, but it's the DevOps kind of buzz terminology and I guess wave of enthusiasm has definitely grown over the last few years, probably dating back to when we first worked together, when you moved into a large digital transformation for one of my clients at the time,
Mm.
and that was really probably when I first heard of DevOps. Actually, I think you were probably the first person that exposed me to that world and gave me the insight. But you were very passionate about it back then, and probably before most people were. What gave you that interest in kind of moving from your traditional Salesforce architect and being kind of broad, or maybe being a specialist in a product that's kind of cloud focused, to then taking that kind of delivery and DevOps focus into your work?
Yeah, the background technologies that I've been exposed to are more of a lift and shift file rather than deployment via APIs, which is what Salesforce is. And so they have quite established followings, and DevOps is a part of that. I think with the Salesforce ecosystem, bringing those good practices into the larger transformations when you do need the collaboration on code, which is source control, collaboration on um, IP, which is documentation, so something like Quip or Confluence. Yeah, so bringing those established processes and applying those to Salesforce, applying that methodology and culture to the Salesforce transformation uh, as those particular transformations are growing. More than just one team, and as you just alluded to, larger digital transformations where it is multi-team and multi-stream, and sometimes it's a necessity of those transformations to have mature DevOps to give the business speed, agility, um, to reduce risk on production incidents by having good automated testing and other quality checks baked into your CICD pipeline, which is continuous integration, continuous delivery. Um, so, yeah, I think just background technologies.
But so that you'd done that before you moved into the Salesforce world, and I guess a lot of people have, right? So,
Mm,
but we still saw back in the early days of DevOps in the Salesforce world. For me, we still saw people that perhaps, even though they'd come from a Java development background or things like that, didn't always have that knowledge of delivery, or didn't always have the interest, perhaps at that point, of being a specialist in DevOps. I think that was something I found in the early days, was actually people wanted to remain quite broad and didn't want to specialize. So
mm.
was it your plan because you saw that kind of that gap opening, or was it just something you enjoyed doing?
I think I saw that gap. There was definitely a gap there, and naturally, if something's missing, I wanna fix it. I wanna fill it, and I had the experience to do that. But I would love to see that gap get smaller and smaller, and I'd like to see it almost as a skill to the developer, like Apex is a skill to the developer today. um, and because every team needs it, whether or not you're a developer or you're an admin. I think every organization will have some maturity in DevOps, whether that be using tools or whether that be just processes. But there does need
Sure.
to be the maturity to get change out safely, and with some speed. And when you do have scale, then you've got that collaboration and the complexity, the added complexities along with it.
Sure. So you're now a program architect. For anyone that doesn't know, what does a program architect do?
A program architect is similar to an enterprise architect. We're there to help the Salesforce customer get the best out of their Salesforce investment. Um, and if you've heard about a technical architect, they're deep on the Salesforce features, and we'll just help facilitate other conversations cross cloud with integrations, security, um, yeah, and those other things.
Sure. So what does a typical day look like for you?
Mm. I would love to say my hands are on the tools more, but unfortunately, we usually sit in PowerPoint presentations. We yeah, we're literally looking at a program and thinking, well, what's the next step to be successful? So whether that's planning out the roadmap, looking at the features, data model, integration, working with various cross-platform teams, maybe cybersecurity or the integration team, whatever it is to really make that program successful, we'll be doing. Um, yeah.
Your role is kind of looking forward and looking at what's coming down the line and making sure that company or that client is set up for success across their environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Most of the time, it's looking forward. Sometimes it is looking to remediate some technical debt if it is not a greenfield org or a greenfield program. But yeah, definitely we're there to make sure the program is successful and the Salesforce platform is successful, not just now, but in the many years to come.
Sure. So if there's someone listening to this thinking, actually, we haven't thought about this, we haven't thought about DevOps or delivery, and we're a Salesforce customer, or we use the platform or are about to. How do you start to implement DevOps within a team or across a program?
No, that's a very good question. So I think everyone is doing has some form of DevOps. Um, DevOps is people, process, and technology all working well together. So I think the first thing is leadership. So you need someone to lead. DevOps is not a rinse and forget; it's a rinse and repeat. So someone to lead and look at the processes, how we get change out. How big is my team? How can we collaborate if we need source control? Making sure that everyone is upskilled on source control, making sure that there are guardrails in place. Um, you're there to support and help the trailblazer so that they can get back to building features rather than spending time on deployments. So looking at that operating model, the roles and responsibilities, and then the tools required, based on the team size. Do we need source control? Do we need CICD? Do we need automated testing? Um, do we need static code analysis? So that's something like PMD or code scan, where you're scanning the code before unit testing. Yeah, and then once you've decided pretty much a solution design for DevOps, then you'll write a plan to implement. And DevOps is a journey. You're not going to have everything from day one, but you can work towards the MVP and then scaling up as your transformation scales up, and then scaling back down as you are entering sustainable growth phase of the business transformation. But
Sure.
the most important thing is you've got a plan at the beginning. It shouldn't be an afterthought, because you'll find common challenges of transformations that are having trouble getting that repeatable delivery out to production and multi-team and multi-streaming is because they haven't planned out their DevOps, their people, process, and technology before they started the program. So plan before the developer and the consultants start to build the features.
I think like a common misconception, and maybe this is more my misconception of DevOps, is like I focus on the tools, right? And I think like focusing on the technology is only part of the challenge. There's,
Yeah.
as you say, there's much more to it than just having fancy tools or having tools that enable delivery. It's the plan and the structure and the people.
Mm. I say 80% of DevOps is your people process, and 20% is your tooling. Um, and,
Sure.
and, and the people and the process will be supported by the tooling, but obviously the people are the most important thing, and they're your 99% of the time they're your developer and your admins building the features.
Yeah, sure. So you've mentioned a couple of things. So you mentioned CICD, and also
Mm.
previously you mentioned that DevOps should and hopefully will become something that's just a skill set that, or something like Apex. It's something that that a developer has in their toolkit.
Mm.
So why have we seen CICD creeping up more and more often on job descriptions? And really, is it something now every developer in the Salesforce ecosystem should have some understanding of CI/CD and CI/CD tooling?
Mm. To your first question, I think as the transformations have got larger, over the last 7 to 10 years, and the projects have become bigger, then you've been looking at your release uh, cadence through environments which is more of a enterprise path to production or enterprise strategy. So you're looking at things like having a system integration testing environment, a user acceptance testing, a staging environment, training environment. So as you had more environments on the path to production to support those testing phases, then you needed to get, I guess, a more repeatable deployment of your package. And so with CI/CD, it is getting, I guess, the a repeatable or the deployment of your package again and again, using the same scripts and producing most of the time the same result. The other parts of that successful deployment is obviously your target environment, um, and that plays a big part of a successful deployment as well, and also data. So I think with collaboration on code, which is source control, and then as you got a longer path to production, you needed CI/CD to give you that repeatability to get that same outcome. Um, so that's why I think CI/CD has become more relevant in the Salesforce industry. In the last half decade or so.
Sure.
And the answer to your second question, should everyone understand uh, those tools and concepts? I think if you're a delivery lead, I think if you're a tech lead, then yes, understanding not just the tool, but I guess some guiding principles around a successful delivery. Uh, what makes up a successful delivery? You might have release hygiene, making sure that you have your path to production, your sandbox is locked down, and making sure that your team have the processes and the tools to successfully connect to a shared path to production or a single release train in order to get that successful, repeatable deployment on the path to production. So those skills do involve CI/CD. What tools are there? What choices do I have? How do I evaluate those tools? What tools are best for our team? All those considerations.
What if someone is coming from, like, if a developer is coming from an environment where they're the only developer,
Mhm.
so they're the only ones committing code, they're the only ones kind of doing any deployment into the Salesforce production org. Um, Going into an environment where they're working with multiple developers, like how much of a learning curve is that to pick up these tools? Like, is that for a developer? Should that be a relatively straightforward kind of learning curve?
I think so. It really depends on I guess, on the team's documentation. I call it a developer guide. So if they have a developer guide that says this is how you commit code, and this is where you check it in, and that's screenshot by screenshot. With source control, you don't need to know command line to use source control. There are tools out there such as SourceTree, put out by Atlassian, which are free tools, and you can use SourceTree to check out a or clone a repository, check out a branch, and commit code all without using command line. And so it just doesn't, I guess, restrict it to just developers, but also admins and they call them declarative designers as well. So I think if the if the team has a good onboarding guide with screenshot step-by-step instructions, then the learning curve shouldn't be that great. I've onboarded 39 developers in a single day. Half of them were offshore, and um, and 20 of them didn't know source control. So and everyone was checking in code by the end of the week, and building their features,
Wow.
all without using command line.
Yeah. Wow. So where does Salesforce DX come into all of this?
So DX is what's called developer experience. So when someone says Salesforce DX, I think they're just talking about uh, the features for development. They could be the code builder, or the schema builder, or the or lightning flows. It could be the IDEs that you're using if you're using Visual Studio Code, and it could also be the source control tools on the open. We call them open source tools like Git. Uh, so developer experience DX, Salesforce DX also has what's called the SFDX CLI command line interface, which you're probably alluding to, and it also has a couple of infrastructure components to it as well. We have our sandboxes, which we've been using for many years, and we also have the Scratch org, which is part of a package development model. So Salesforce DX encompasses all those particular tools for you to develop, build, and release on the Salesforce platform.
Nice. So if someone, because I guess you alluded to wanting that gap to get smaller and more people to be filling those DevOps specialist positions, and I can tell you now it's very hard. Like they're when I get a Salesforce DevOps role, it's often the hardest role to fill, and it's one of those ones where you're like, really, have I really got to go and find another person like this? Because there's so few people out there. So in your experience, are DevOps skills transferable? I.e., could someone be coming from a completely non-Salesforce background and come into the ecosystem and pick up the tooling and I guess the people and the processes are, well, maybe the processes are different, but the technology may be different, right? So what's the learning curve for someone that is a DevOps specialist coming into the Salesforce world?
Hmm. I think the first thing to look at is the leadership. So you need to have leadership skills. You need to be a leader. You're providing a service to the developers. You're making sure developers are spending more time on building features than they are releasing features to production. So there are quite a lot of transferable skills coming from other technologies. The core CICD pipeline, the way that you orchestrate different tasks on the pipeline, the way that you use source control and run builds off that code, or run quality checks over that code. The only difference with the Salesforce ecosystem is you're using this SFDX CLI to deploy. You've got plugins like Code Scanner to run PMD. You might invoke automated testing, although that's probably applicable to all verticals of IT as well as the Salesforce vertical. So it's just understanding the Salesforce, how to deploy using SFDX, the different metadata types, and things like what is a sandbox. Other technologies may not have that concept of that infrastructure because they might not be cloud technologies. What is a sandbox? What is a Scratch org? So I think DevOps people need from other technologies probably need another 20%, but they're going to bring 80% of skills they've learned elsewhere to the ecosystem.
Nice. And then a DevOps team or people that are involved in DevOps in a environment. So we often think of it being a developer skill set, and I know there's certain requirements for scripting and things like that in the different roles. But can you come from an admin background, and or even can you come from a non-IT background, and pick up certain elements of DevOps and tooling and being effective in this role, and what do those different roles look like?
Yeah, it's a good question. Look, there are many Salesforce consultants, and I think developers do that have come from non-technology or non-Salesforce backgrounds, um, and it just really is where they're passionate about. So I think a DevOps person will have passion for the Trailblazer. They'll have passion for providing the business the speed and agility. Um, so I think, and for example, military. So if you're ex-military, or if you're a veteran, many leadership skills, uh, and other skills to bring to the Salesforce ecosystem. So I don't know if you're not from a technology background, it might take you a little bit longer to skill up on those on technologies such as CICD, but definitely not source control. So you as a Salesforce consultant or developer, whether you've got 1 year or 10 years in industry, if you need to use source control to collaborate on code, then it's very easy to skill up. As far as being a DevOps engineer, release engineer, it might help if you do have background of other technologies, like Bash and Python and Node.js and some of those other technologies used in other verticals of IT. It'll be an easy road for you to transfer to the Salesforce industry for a DevOps role. If you then
Sure.
want to be a Salesforce developer, well, then obviously that's a little bit more of a different skill set, and you need to learn up on the platform and security and Apex and LWCs and so on and so forth.
You made an interesting point there, because you said like a release engineer, and
Mm,
we get these roles that are like release managers,
mm,
and then we get like DevOps leads or DevOps
mm,
manager or DevOps architect. So what? And I find that sometimes like a release manager isn't always the same as a DevOps person. Like they are involved in, like, sometimes they come from more of like a project management background.
mm,
So what's the difference between a release manager in the DevOps sense and a release manager in the project management sense, if there is any difference?
mm. I think release engineer is more alluding to a delivery lead who is using a tool to release rather than having a script. So or an in-house CICD tool. So if you've got a package like Capado or AutoRabbit, so they're two managed packages from ISVs that help with releasing to production. So ALM, application lifecycle management. So it's not just about deployment. It'll be integrated with your story tracking. It's going to invoke your static code analysis. It's going to run your automated testing. So if you've got an application to do that, you don't necessarily need the skills in house to deploy, and so you call that person more a release engineer because you're using software to do it. So that's the buy. If you were to build yourself, so you use the command line interface, and you're going to put your deployment pipeline on your own enterprise tools in house. It might be a Jenkins, or it might be a ADO, or a Bitbucket pipeline. Then you're going to be programming, coding up your release train, and so you're probably going to need a DevOps engineer or a DevOps tech lead to be coding that pipeline.
But then flipping that question to thinking about the admins that will be listening to this, thinking, maybe this is a good career move for me because DevOps skills are in demand, and there's a gap in the market. Is an admin potentially right for that kind of release management role when there is a platform or a tool like a Copado or an AutoRabbit, um,
Mm.
they're not then having to do any coding, right? So is that the kind of environment that an admin could perform a DevOps role or release role when it's just requiring that kind of bulk product that sits in between and does the programming side of things for them?
Look, absolutely, absolutely. If they've got leadership skills and they're passionate about getting that deployment out on multiple sandboxes on the path to production, and ultimately production itself, um, with with speed and agility, using a tool like that, then definitely an admin can be a release engineer, and they don't need the programming skills to code up a CI/CD pipeline. I mean, it's all about getting change out for the business in the most efficient and fastest possible way, and sometimes that's with a tool.
And then the final question on this whole process, like, is it right for every business, or because I mean I do deployments with change sets still, right? And for me that's fine because it's moving very minimal configuration changes into production from a sandbox. Like that is still right. Right, I'm
Mm.
on the right path there. I don't need to go out and get any tooling or bring in an architect to do any of that because that works for me.
Yeah,
So, is there a certain point where it gets to where actually you need to start taking things a bit more seriously?
yeah. No, you're absolutely right. Change sets have been there since day one, and it's a beautiful part of the platform, and that works for you. And so you've got probably a dev sandbox, and you're going to test in there, and then you're going to put that to production. And you're getting it out quickly, and and that's beautiful. When you start to have, if you started to have a few more developers, then they had their own sandboxes, and you were feeling like that the sandboxes were getting old, and you weren't syncing, and you needed to collaborate more. You would naturally feel that, right, now is the time to look at a more collaborative approach to that code. And if you did have larger features and you had more sandboxes on the path to production, and you needed to deploy a few more times instead of just once that same package, then you would naturally want to improve the efficiency of that deployment, and that was the same package again and again. So you then naturally go down a tool for CICD. So you'll feel like you naturally look at the uh, look at your challenges you're having right now, and then you'll implement those things. If you do know that you're going to ramp up significantly, then plan for those things, um, so that you don't kind of have inefficiencies in your developers, and have to wait until you then install those processes and tools to gain that efficiency back and that speed on the path to production.
And that's you mentioned if you had more developers. So it's not just custom code, right? It's also that all of this still relates to configuration and declarative
Mm.
changes are still deployed in the same way through these tools. It's not a case of this is only done when you're writing Apex or Lightning Web Components or whatnot. It's the same case applies for multiple admins working on different sandboxes.
Yeah, that's correct. It's applicable for configuration and code. So configuration of your objects, lightning flows, anything that you're using a mouse to point and click the development of, as well as the Apex classes and LWCs in the code spaces.
Even dynamic forms, my new favorite thing.
Excellent.
Um,
Yeah.
so you've been in the ecosystem for a long time now. You've seen a lot, done a lot, and you're still incredibly passionate and I guess excited about the world of Salesforce and the ecosystem. So what keeps you excited?
Look, I think that the ecosystem is definitely a very vibrant and lively community, and and we're fortunate that we're all here to help each other. And it doesn't matter if you're a newbie or someone who's been in the ecosystem for quite some time. We're genuinely happy to help, and we genuinely like to see other people succeed. and it's all about customer success. So the better we are, the better we make our customers. And the Salesforce vertical of IT, I think, is a leading vertical. It's growing year on year, and that gives a lot of opportunity for the trailblazer, such as myself, or the newbie to to really have a successful and vibrant career in the industry.
Yeah, nice, nice. Well, look, thank you so much. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. And yeah, I've enjoyed hearing more about the world of DevOps, and I'm sure our listeners will too. So, where can they ask any questions if they have any?
Um, I, you can always look on LinkedIn. Find me on LinkedIn, Adam Best. There's not too many of us, but yeah, always happy to help and answer any questions you may have. Thank you for
Nice.
having
Well,
me, Ben.
thank you. All the best.